Satisfy your need for happiness through your own curiosity with the Ranveer Show. There must have been a J curve moment for China. Like China would have exploded after the 80s.
Yes,
What were the factors that went into that rise?
very simple. The government kept getting out of the way, which is that when China was a very government, it was a communist controlled government, and also the government was very much in your lives. You couldn't own land in China, you couldn't own property in China. Everything was controlled by the government right till the 1970s, and China was a economic basket case. Then under Deng Xiaoping, he's a very famous leader, they began to open up, and they gave people more and more freedom from a very tight control. They gave people more and more economic freedom. They didn't give people political freedom. So you could not vote and you could not do any of that. But they gave people economic freedom, much more than, in fact, the Indian government gave to Indians. And that's, for me, is one of the big contradictions, like for me, which is we called ourselves a democracy. We gave people lots of political freedom. Okay, you can vote the way you want to. We did not give people economic freedom. There was so much licenses, regulation. You can invest there, you can't invest there, you can't take your money there, you can't do that. We were completely throttled as economic citizens of this country, even though we got a lot of political freedom. You can vote. China did the opposite. They told people, hey, we have all the power in terms of politically. You can't speak against us and you can't, like in terms of go and vote, but we're going to keep giving you more economic freedom. And they got so much foreigners to come into their country. And they invited foreign investment and said to all the leading multinationals, you come to China, you tell us what you want. We'll make it work for you. So, I think that there's this contrast that people don't quite know. And the way they did that was quite impressive. They invited foreigners to come and help them manage their companies, to come in terms of invest wherever they wanted. So all the McDonald's and Coke and all, they first arrived in China and they got a complete red carpet that come and do what you feel like in our country. So we have to think of it very differently in terms of what China did and what India did. And India was much slower in giving its people such economic freedom.
Is 2020s India, 1990s China?
In some ways, yes. Economically, yes. But again, I think that the only difference here is that China, in fact, did a lot more than what we have done so far.
For example?
In terms of creating the environment for business to do well. Like in terms of that, there was a complete red carpet for business. I think in this country, even the government sometimes I feel almost looks at Indian businessmen somewhat as being like a bunch of crooks or something. And there's like in terms of it. And I feel that this whole fear of what the investigative agencies can come and knock on your door and do all that, I think that hurts business sentiment somewhat. So in some ways, it's true that the China of the 1990s, you can compare India, is similar. I feel very optimistic about India's growth for the next 10, 15 years. But I will still caution, having seen what China did a lot more. And China was a lot more ruthless that way. Like in India, for example, we still feel that the poor need to be given a lot of subsidies. They need to be given a lot of help and stuff. That even Mr. Modi, he's been very reluctant to change some of the Congress policies. Like, the college, for example, of giving people farm in terms of loans or even sort of the Manrega, right? Which is in terms of giving people employment, which the government provides if you can't get employment and stuff. China did nothing like that. They told its poor people, you either work or too bad. We're not going to support you in some way. So it was a very ruthless form of what they did. And that's what sort of created the productivity boom and stuff to do. We have not done what China has done. So it's such an important distinction in terms of how ruthless China was. And here we are still, very cautious about what we do. And even this government, you called it right wing, but from an economic perspective, I think it's more centrist. It's not done anything to change the land or the labor laws or something the way China did. We haven't done that as yet.
Okay. Perhaps it's a little more empathetic, our government, towards the lower rungs of society. China wasn't as empathetic, but then that forced everyone to either fade away
Yeah.
or get the best version of themselves to the forefront and make money for their families.
Yes.
I don't think we'll ever see that in India though.
Yes.
Because the fabric of our society is very emotional,
Absolutely correct.
right?
Yes. So
Like-
therefore, I'm very careful about when you say China and India are the same thing. But you're so correct. This feeling the social fabric of a country is very important. And, China was able to do it. It's also because China is a very homogeneous society. We are a very diverse society. And that in terms of the way that one part of India thinks is so different from another part of India thinks. I travel in India a lot. And when I go from one state to another, the moment you cross the border, all of a sudden the narrative changes, how people think changes, their eating habits change, the culture changes. In China, you don't have that. China, it's much more sort of homogeneous. Everywhere you go in China is a lot more similar. In India's case, we are so diverse. So that's part of the reason why for, us to go down that path is possibly very difficult and may never happen.
I also assume it's because the Communist Party in China was very sure that they'd be in power even after such brutal policy making. If an Indian government does the same thing, their election chances are at risk.
You can argue that, but my feeling is that even in India, when we do that, so many governments still lose elections. I just try, for example, you go to places and the Congress tried that too, give a lot of freebies, do that, they still lost elections, right? I mean, even now, in terms of, I was traveling in Andhra Pradesh, where Jagan Reddy is the chief minister. He is known as the king of freebies. He's given lots of freebies to his people. And Chandrababu Naidu, who's his main opposition figure, he's sort of seen as more pro-development, almost being pro. But even though Jagan Reddy has given people so many freebies, I came back feeling that he could still lose the election. So India's a much more complicated story that you do X and you think you'll get Y. But the whole idea is that this is a much more complicated country. China is in fact, that way a simpler country to understand than India.
If you enjoyed today's clip, make sure you check out these curated playlists that we've made especially for you related to the subject that was spoken about in this clip.